wellness at work. Jenna is the Senior Global Learning Design Manager at Enersys, a manufacturer and distributor of industrial batteries, chargers, and accessories. In her current role, Jenna designs, develops, and/or curates interactive and inclusive learning events for diverse groups. She manages a global team responsible for creating and facilitating engaging learning opportunities through social learning, virtual live sessions, standard e-learning courses, micro-learning content, and more. Now, joining Jenna in conversation, we have Hunter Canning. Please take it away. I've taken up a lot of time in that reflection, but I appreciate the space there.
Thank you, Mariella. Always a pleasure to see you and hear you. Jenna, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you making the time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you dig into talking about how you promote and support employees' well-being. And first, I'd like you to maybe share with our listeners and shout out to our listeners. If questions come up, please do drop them in the chat and we will pepper them in. But if you tell us, Jenna, like what brought you to a place where you're like, this is something I want to focus on? Did something happen for you that you're like needed to shift and you realized you could help others by making that shift?
In some sense of that, yes. So outside of my role as the Senior Manager of Global Learning Design at Enersys, I'm also the current chairperson for our business resource group, Women in Leadership. And within this group, we work a lot on the professional development of women and really employees of any gender at Enersys and give them resources and opportunities to learn more to further their careers. But with the onset of the pandemic, we realized that there was a serious need to address the issues around mental health, around, just caring for yourself, your physical well-being when people are now working in remote spaces, your social well-being when you're no longer at work around people and people become very isolated. Thinking about all of the parents or caretakers who are now trying to juggle simultaneously their full-time workload while caring for children, caring for parents or other family members, all happening in the home during a time where it's very scary and stressful to invite someone else to come into your home and help you. So I think the onset of the pandemic is what took something that I always cared about and prioritized for myself and my team and encouraged me to find ways to help others prioritize it and create spaces where people could come and share what they were feeling and what they needed to kind of be in a better space. Yeah,
We need it now more than ever. I think you're absolutely right. So it's really wonderful that you're doing this work. Can you tell us, if someone's run down, if their health and wellness isn't up, how does that impact, someone's work life?
I mean, for so long, I feel like the work world has operated under the assumption that home is one thing and work is another thing. And at the end of the day, we are human beings. We are not robots, right? We have emotions, we have experiences, we have challenges, and all of these things bring with them, implications into our workday. So I think ultimately when people are stressed out, when they are saddened, when they are afraid, when they are dealing with mental health issues, physical health issues, the way that materializes in our work is, we seem disorganized, disengaged, overwhelmed, maybe less productive. We might be perceived as being reactive or combative or defensive because our emotional self is really not in a kind of neutral space, and ultimately less responsive, less engaged. So all of these things happen in the workplace, which can obviously negatively reflect upon the employee, but very often are a result of what we're experiencing outside of those 9 to 5 hours or whatever your hours are in your workplace.
Yeah, I think there was this awakening in the past couple of years, right? That we used to you just got to work as hard as you can. It doesn't matter how many hours, work until you get it done. And then we're suddenly at home, a lot of us, not everyone, but a lot of people that were working from home, suddenly there was no boundaries with work. It was like, I'm always on call, apparently now with the job. And so now we're in this opportunity, I feel like with 2 years in, right, where we're coming to realizations and you're creating programs that can actually help us restructure the way we approach our wellness and well-being and health and mental health and physical health, right? So what are some of the things we can do?
Yeah, so great question. I think it's really important to note that I think about myself. I'm getting emails all the time from all the different things I've subscribed to of, oh, ways to take breaks during your workday, and, get up and get outside and set timers so that you can get away from your desk. All of these things feel superficial and feel insignificant if you do not have a workplace that supports that culture. Right? So we can have all these strategies and all these ideas, but if I know at the end of the day that my boss is making sure that my light on Teams is always green and that I am present and available during every minute of that 9 to 5 window, for example, then I know I can't necessarily do that. I don't feel the space to do that. So while I'm, really excited to list all of the things that we can do, I think it's really important to remember that creating and fostering a culture where employees feel safe, where they feel free, where they can speak up, where they can make suggestions, take the time they need for themselves without fear of any kind of repercussions, that's important and that's key, right? So some of the things that we've done at our different locations at Enersys and that I've done even in previous jobs is having things like, free diagnostic checks and ways to have access to things for our physical health. Workshops around nutrition, creating challenges for like physical challenges, like step challenges or sports competitions. At one time, I worked for an organization that hosted a sort of Olympics where it was very low pressure, the activity, but it was a sense of building community and creating space, and it happened during work hours, and we raised money for an important cause, right? Hosting health fairs with external vendors, creating partnerships with companies can, maybe sponsor any costs like for gym memberships and such. Once I've participated in something where the company went on a designated walk, right? Anybody who wanted to go could go. It was supported by leadership. Everyone knew that between, this hour, everyone was free to step away from their desks and go on a walk. And when we came back, there was a company sponsored lunch full of healthy foods, right? And while these things might happen once a year, I think when companies take a proactive stance in showing that it's important, it begins to trickle down to the individual departments. And we start to see that, my health is important to me, it's important to my manager, it's important to my company as well. But really, when it comes to mental health, all of those things only go so far. So I think when we talk about mental health, we really need to have as a foundation, training and education around things like cultural awareness, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mental health, unconscious bias training. These things might not seem related on the surface, but the reality is that it creates it creates a knowledge and an understanding among people to be more open-minded to the people that they work with, who work for them, and to kind of foster that culture that I was talking about, of where this is a safe space and you can be yourself. I think that ultimately comes back to whether or not people can speak up and say they're having trouble and that they need help, that they need access to different resources. Establishing, employee resource groups, opportunities for employees to come together and talk about health-related topics. And a lot of this can be done in in-person environments and virtual environments. And, we've done even more from a virtual perspective as well for women in leadership, like creating events literally for, a discussion around your mental health and having in our back pockets all of the resources that are available to you. Right. And that we weren't sure how that was going to go. And it was wildly popular. I mean, people came out and they came to the next one and they emailed me privately and they talked about how it impacted their ability to just feel a part of at work, right? And to feel like they could talk about these things and not feel alone in their struggles and stressors.
Wow, there are so many resources there, and there's so many ways we can go. I'm really interested in hearing more about the differences between, because now there's been so much working at home. Now
Sure.
people are going back into the office. Now we're in a hybrid. I think that brings some stress in itself, right? Of
Absolutely.
having to do both. And are there ways to manage them differently, or is it a hybrid? Is the solution a hybrid as well?
I think the solution is a hybrid in the sense that it depends on, so Enersys is a global organization. So when Women in Leadership started, for example, it was pre-pandemic. It was piloted as a small group that met in person that would host in-person events. We very quickly learned how to pivot entirely and create a space for a global audience, where more people could attend, and found ways to have these dynamic events in virtual spaces. So a lot of those things, like the physical challenges, creating a sense of community around like step challenges and having prizes or raising money for charity, that all can be done in a virtual setting. Maybe it's not as fun, maybe it's not as engaging, but it can happen, right? But in a virtual setting, those mental health discussions, like I said, they were key. And I think what's really important there is having someone who is willing to set the tone from the start. So for example, sharing something very personal about themselves that kind of shows that vulnerability and lets everyone else in the room know this is a safe space to bring yours, right? That's going to be a big difference and a big necessity in a virtual environment. People, obviously, they're not in the same room. It's going to be a little bit harder to open up. We've done a lot of resource sharing via like our internal websites or intranets, right? Building pages around mental health resources, what's important, what's happening in different locations, email campaigns and chat groups with all of these resources, trying to reach as many people as we can. And then, like I said, the employee resource groups, promoting any kind of shared experiences, sharing the successes and the stories from employees with one another, so people can begin to connect when they are working in those home environments, when they don't have the chance to kind of see people on the day-to-day. But ultimately, all of this only goes so far, like I said, without the kind of culture that supports it. And I think a lot of that comes through policy.
Well, that's exactly where I wanted to go next with you is what are the policies that support this wellness when someone's going through stressful events that are outside of work? This is it's not an HR issue yet, right? As you said, you can show up as irritable or short-tempered, but it's what's really going on, something that probably maybe happened outside of work. So are there policies around that to help this?
Yeah, so there is a lot that can be done, thinking about policies around bereavement, parental leave, PTO policies that are flexible, paid time off policies that say, no, you don't have to use your paid time off to go to the doctor, paid PTO policies that allow some discretion for the manager to say like, okay, we have this issue, it doesn't, and you're out of paid time off, but it's more important that you take care of your mental health. So let's, do something to kind of figure that out. When managers' hands are tied and the policies work against the employee, then that flexibility isn't there, and we don't have the space to kind of get the help that we need. But really, programs and policies that are in place, like peer-to-peer advocacy, so that people can speak up if they're struggling with alcoholism or drug addiction. I mean, we've seen a huge number, across the board in the United States specifically. I would imagine it goes beyond that, in deaths and being institutionalized for drug and alcohol addiction, with the pressures of the pandemic and the lack of access to resources when in-person spaces are compromised by obviously pandemic related policies, right? So any kind of policies that encourage people to get the help they need and ensure that at the end of the day, the job is still there for them, right? We need policies and programs that create space for honesty and open communication, rather than those that kind of promote or have penalties associated with them.
Absolutely, because I think, like you said, we've seen a rise in in addiction and using, as a coping mechanism, I think, for people, because they don't have these other resources or policies to turn to. And so potentially they're using these other ones that, you know, you can buy downstairs at the liquor store. So it's a taboo. It's been, I think, inherently a taboo topic for a long time. It's a very personal topic. So what does that look like? Okay, so let's say there's a company that has policies that support that. How does that show up for me as an employee that might be struggling?
Yeah, and so I think that's really important too. A lot of times, unless you're in HR, you don't even know that these things exist, right? So as companies and organizations, we need to first make sure that our policies are very transparent, that the programs we have are very transparent. So we use opportunities in Women in Leadership, for example, when we have discussions around mental health, to point out to as many people who are listening, do you know all of these things are available to you? Something else I've seen is having actually designated peer advocates who, if there is a suspicion or an idea that something may be going awry, you know, this person is kind of pushed in that direction, someone who has experience and resources and is prepared to have those conversations, so that before kind of stepping outside of the workplace, you have that connection to another employee who has that shared experience. But awareness is huge, awareness and education. And we have to be able to talk about it in a way that removes that taboo piece, right? That you were talking about. We have to be able to take that away. And I think the more we talk about things and we talk about them in a very open way, the more we share our experiences, the more we have people who are willing to kind of be vulnerable and talk about their own challenges and struggles, the more power we kind of take away from that fear, right? And we enable people to start talking about themselves and feel safe to do so.
Yeah, because the fear at the end of the day is that they're going to lose their job.
Right. And so that has to be really, really clear that is not going to happen. And unfortunately, words only go so far, right? People are going to need to see through action and through examples that these things are real, that the company means it, and that they will be held up at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a question from the audience.
Great.
They want to hear a bit about your wellness, Jenna. Can you please share a few tips for promoting your own wellness at work? What do you like to do?
Absolutely. So so one of the things from the mental health chat perspective, right? The reason that kind of came about was because I knew that I had a story to tell. I had a baby shortly before the onset of the pandemic. So I think just kind of postpartum anxiety teamed up with all that the pandemic brought on. I suffered for a long time in silence before I realized that I just couldn't go on the way that I was. And luckily, I have a very supportive manager and a very open team where we are really open about what we're going through. And I knew that I could seek those appointments and have those phone calls during work hours if need be. And ultimately I had to, I had to be on medication for a bit, but in that process, I learned at the astronomical amount of people who were also suffering with the same thing. So I chose to create an opportunity where I could expose that bit of myself solely so that it would allow other people to kind of speak about themselves too. And that's from a mental health perspective. From a physical health perspective, I'm very fortunate that I work from home right now. I do make very clear boundaries. When it's time for my lunch, I step away from my desk. I usually exercise. That's part of my routine. And I also run periodic office yoga for anybody who wants to attend. So I do virtual, like chair yoga, and invite anyone at the company who wants to attend and kind of come, and they all turn their cameras off so nobody's looking, and they do, just kind of follow a very simple guided stretch and breathing activity. It's because we have to learn to separate ourselves from the work at some point.
There's two things that really stuck out for me there that I'd like to highlight. Thank you for talking about medication, with the guidance of the doctor. That's a very, thank you for sharing that. And you said what we were talking about, historically too, medication was used to be a taboo thing, right? Yep. And to use your word earlier when you were talking about someone else, but I'm going to say about you, you were brave and you told your team, yeah, you told your team, and then they helped you. And I think it really shows to me, it stands out that it's a two-party system, right? It's like you have to be brave, and you also have to have a workplace that has training in this and understands how to have those conversations with you, and that this is not the end of the job. This maybe is the beginning of you in a transformation to be better at your job.
Absolutely. I really believe that wellness promotes productivity. I really believe that when employees have that area of their lives supported, they are more productive. They are dedicated. They're in a better headspace, in a better position to really bring their best selves to work. And that's why I think it's important to include it in all that we do from an organizational perspective, because employees will be, more engaged and just in a much better place to really make changes, bring creative solutions, think outside of the box. All of that happens when we're feeling good. Right? That doesn't happen when we're feeling pressured, when we're feeling stressed, when we're overwhelmed, and when we're unappreciated.
Yeah. I also love that you brought up yoga. It's, sometimes when I'm on these Zoom calls, I like to play the game with people. What's outside your Zoom screen right now? And like my yoga mat is always right there. And I noticed you have a nonprofit, don't you, that has something to do with yoga? Can you share us a little?
I do. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So I actually also run a small nonprofit outside of work called Namaste Sober. And it is a nonprofit that brings yoga and meditation to people who are struggling or in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And it's actually open to anyone who is either struggling or is just understands and respects the principle of anonymity and wants to come and support someone else. So we've been doing it for about 5 going on 6 years now. We meet once a week, and we're doing some virtual stuff and trying to build up our social media as well to try to reach people in other places. It's been really incredible. It started as a very informal thing. I knew what yoga was doing for me as a person. I thought it could do a lot more for people who were probably afraid to give it a try. And so I created this space with the help of others, and it's just totally blossomed over the years.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love the title. It's not without a sense of humor. Namaste Stover.
Exactly. I'm glad it was not lost on you. Yeah.
Not lost on me. No, that's gold. That is gold. So we're just about to wrap up. Can you maybe touch on, how organizations can help balance a bit between, rest and wellness is obviously very important, but so is productivity. So how do we weigh the scales?
Yeah, I think ultimately we have to put some trust in our employees, because people who care about their work aren't going to spend all of their time watching office yoga videos and being in these chats and events, especially when you talk about employee resource groups, for example. They're ran by employees, they're not ran by people who are paid to do that. This is not their job. So it's ultimately, the spreading out of the events and all of that, of course, is what kind of prevents it from taking up too much time. But I really think that for so long, we've operated on the assumption that taking this extra time for wellness gets in the way of our productivity, where I really feel like it's the opposite. When we have a culture and we have policies and procedures and programs in place that support the physical, mental, and even spiritual wellness of our employees, I think that they just feel better about what they're doing and do a better job. I really do. I think that when we treat wellness like a nicety rather than a necessity, we miss out on great people who produce great results. I think if you want to keep the right people at your company long term, we have to think about the whole individual. And now more than ever, people are looking for benefits that aren't just, their paycheck. They want to feel supported. They want to have that room. They want to have those options. And I think that's how we keep and maintain good employees and ultimately, do the best work in whatever industry we're in.
Well, we're out of time. I could talk to you all day about this.
Same.
Jenna, thank you so much for making the time. How can our listeners stay connected with you? Is LinkedIn the best way, or?
Yeah, I would absolutely love that, especially if you have any kind of ideas or questions about how we transition from those in-person activities to virtual. We've done it so much recently that I would love to share that knowledge. So any ideas or questions are welcome. My LinkedIn, we can share my LinkedIn as well as my email.
Great. We'll have them drop that in the chat. Jenna, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thanks for the opportunity.